KLTV sound check. KLTV sound check.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday morning meeting of the BOCC. We'll get started here. If you want to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah, I'd ask Commissioner Mortensen for a review of the minutes.
Good morning, everyone. As usual, I reviewed the minutes of the activities last week and I move to approve those minutes.
We got a motion to approve. I'm just checking real quick. Any questions, corrections?
I have no corrections.
Okay, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. Thank you. Run through a consent agenda here. Item 1 is a agreement with Teresa Johnson. It's a CPA we use on an as needed basis to help us when we have questions on the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA Act. Treasury changes guidelines every so often, so we try to keep up with that. Item 2 is a personal services agreement. Over at the jail, we had a county employee that helped in the mental health side. Plus, we used NAFCare. They had an employee that helped, so we had 2 people that did that. We lost the county employee. So what this agreement is, NAFCare has been doing a good job for it. So now NAFCare will supply both the bodies instead of the county supplying one and them supplying one. So both employees will be through NAFCare. The cost is roughly about $20,000 extra. But I think we get it's worked well with them doing it. I think they probably take on a little bit of liability or relieve a little bit of liability from the county when it's their employee doing some of the work. So we think that is a worthwhile change. Number 3 is just a time extension for this agreement to get it completed. 4 through 9 all deal with the Cloverdale realignment project, and you can see what they are. They're easements and warranty deeds and stuff to get that project done. Number 10 is an adjustment to the agreement on the Eric Creek Fish Passage project, and this was WashDOT initiated. They changed a couple rules that sound like or procedures, and so they're asking us to make it a couple amendments here. There's just kind of a change in how the dollars are accounting for. And once again, that was requested by WashDOT. Number 11 is a bid award for culvert pipe, beveled in sections, couplets, and other drainage system products. We assign it to all bidders. It's a product that's not overly expensive. Say Longview supplier is $38. We need some stuff in Woodland and that supplier is $40. We'll just use the Woodland supplier versus driving up and getting it for the 2. So we bid all people on that. And then for the sign materials, we award that by section. So that goes to all bidders too. 13 through 15, this pertains to Hazeldale Road and West Side Highway. If you remember many years ago, I think it was around 213, it looks like 213, 214, we redid that intersection where Hazeldale comes off. There used to be a house there and they redid all that. Well, we had to take responsibility for some of that, if I'm remembering right from yesterday, for 3 years, and then we would cede it back to the state of Washington and they'd take it on. Well, state of Washington never acts fast, but this is turning some of that property back to the state of Washington for that intersection. Board correspondence, we appointed Corey Dow Kramer to the Southwest Washington Workforce Development Council. Josh Johnson to the Solid Waste Advisory Council. Leonard Smith to the Historic Preservation Committee. Vouchers in amount of $3,212,179.77. Questions, comments, concerns on consent agenda?
If you're up for a comment, I'll take out a page off my colleague and do a historical thing. We're old enough to know that there was time without internet, and it was ARPA that was fundamental in the building of internet in this country, and that ARPA was Advanced Research Project Agency. And when it became more possessive of the government, it became DARPA, and the D for defense. So, and
That was the one that Vice President Gore claimed to have been instrumental in developing.
I was hoping to ignore that. Yes. But expertise is wherever you can find it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, there was another question on the board correspondence. We had a carryover from last week. Did we resolve that at all?
You know what I heard on that? I talked to the mayor of Castle Rock, and it appears that expired, correct me if I'm wrong, March of 2023, and the person that was sitting on that never put in the reappointment thing. So it came to us as an open seat. It sounds like the small cities would like to keep the same person that was on that, but they would need to put in an application, and that's as far as I know on it at this point in time.
Got it. Yeah, I would still recommend we do the appointment of a different person from a different community. So how soon would we make a decision on this?
Well, I think we need to, I wouldn't let it go past next Tuesday. Or,
Okay.
you okay with that? I mean,
I'm grudgingly okay with that. Preserving the thing that makes it difficult is we can only discuss these things in a public arena. And when we discuss people, it always makes me nervous because it's really easy to misunderstand things.
yeah. I'm confused why they let it expire and never redid it. That's kind of an oversight on.
Well, that's something where I would still argue part of what I like to do is get different people on advisory board. There is no possessive ownership of that, and that it was an expired term tells me that there isn't the interest there, or the interest wasn't there. So I'm perfectly happy at that point to say that the gates are open. And the only applicant we had for small cities was the individual.
Right.
So at this point, it looks a little bit capricious on our part to say, well, let's wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a very short, small question. Going back to the consent agenda, and we're hiring the two,
Is the light on?
yes,
Are you close enough to the microphone?
yes. Okay, the two mental health professionals that we're going to, who are they going to answer to? Who do they go back to? Who do they give the reporting to?
Well, they're NAFCARE employees, but we probably have some kind of agreement on what the function is they do.
Okay, because
Don't have direct control over their employees.
yeah, I question that I would
But I
like to
think
have.
NAFCARE does answer to the director, the Corrections Department Director. So, I mean,
So
they're working for us under contract.
So they would answer to the health director that we just hired.
No,
Well,
it answered to Marin.
Answer to Marin.
It answered to Marin.
Oh,
Unless there's a different protocol, Marin, she's here.
okay, good. Okay, because I think that the information that they would attain would be very, very vital for our local health. And it needs to be given to our local doctors as soon as possible. And I just see that if somebody were local handling this, it would happen a lot easier than if they go back to the state and then come back here.
Sure, they're NAFCARE employees, but we have direct oversight and can help choose who they are and who they aren't, basically. So the one that is currently working for NAFCARE is a local mental health provider, and the one they're looking at hiring is also local. Yep, yeah. I'm sorry, Marin Fox, Director of Corrections.
Thank you.
The purchase of culvert may not be related to what my comment is, but it brings up the subject. We are spending millions and millions and millions of extra dollars for environmental and fish recovery on streams. One, the structure and repair that comes along, but then all of the added environmental and fish and all of this. It's come to my attention that we are seeing very little actual net increase or response in the fisheries due to all these changes. My point would be, when our county is working on these projects, push back on the state for results. We are doing this for some kind of results, and we need reports.
So Ron, as the county's representative on the Fish Recovery Board, we've been monitoring that. The statistics statewide are pretty dismal. You're absolutely right on that. Mostly because the resources are being spent in Puget Sound, which is kind of a dead sea zone, and the fish die when they get out to the sound. We've been advocating locally that we do two things. We get more resources on areas like Lower Columbia, where there isn't the kind of degradation of the waterways that is common up north. And then secondly, that we began paying attention to entire watersheds, try to get a complete watershed that's free of barriers and restored for salmon spawning. It's been difficult to do that, as you might appreciate. Our board represents 5 different counties, and we have a list of projects every year, and it's been reviewed by a technical advisory committee on, whether it fits the criteria and has a high degree of success. But almost every one of those members looks to see how many of those projects are in their own county. And so that's not the right way to do it. It should be watershed by watershed for better results. The good news is the numbers are up in the Lower Columbia Valley. We're getting the job done much better than particularly where most of the money is being spent. That's up in the Puget Sound area.
So at least representing our county, you could at least help stress the results of an area or watershed as an example for us, the taxpayers, and as an example for other counties in the state then. Results oriented.
Thank you.
I guess on that happy note, I'd like to know, is getting the job done mean spending more money in a certain area versus net return? Are we seeing major increases in the fisheries?
We're seeing increases locally more than in other regions of the state, which is one of the reasons I say we need to get more of the job done locally with the resources that come down our way. There's, in my opinion, there's an awful lot of resources wasted in areas that have a low probability of success, but it's where most of the people of the state live. And so they can continue to insist on spending the money elsewhere. Some of the things that we're doing, and Eric Creek is one of them, the the mega rivers, that's the Mill, Abernathy, Germany, Creek River, are actually a study group with controls, and Abernathy is where they're applying the different solutions. Removing barriers, removing culverts is just one of several different strategies that have to be used on the whole watershed. And so they're monitoring that and seeing, even though we've been at it for 15 years, they're still inventing and learning what makes a difference with salmon. In the recent years, one of the most important discoveries the scientists are making and identifying is the importance of beavers in creating ponds in which the baby salmon can rest and grow over the winter as they make their way downstream to the ocean. Up until just recently, the typical response is get rid of the beaver, that they're an enemy and they cause more problems than they're worth. We're having to reverse that just because they're applying the science. And we're learning things like that all the time. Japanese knotweed is an invasive species that is disastrous in destroying riverbanks from having the kind of overgrowth that keeps the waters cool. And of course, salmon have to have it at a certain temperature. And if you have an infestation of knotweed, they're barren creek sites. And so you have to try to remove that. You can't take a weed whacker to those kind of weeds because every little parcel then sprouts a new plant. So again, these are things that are being learned. It's a long process. But I think there ought to be a better allocation of resources so we can continue to do the things that are working in the lower Columbia region.
Okay.
If you don't mind my asking you a follow-up question, when a young salmon makes it out to sea, what are the statistics that they will come back? It's pretty slim, isn't it?
So typically the expectation is 1 to 3% return from the ocean. And that's why there are so many salmon that are spawned in the natural setting, because the survival rate is pretty horrendous. So.
Yeah, and do we know whether that's the ubiquitous sea lion population that's causing us grief, or?
No, the sea lion do their feasting in the rivers, but there are plenty of other hazards out in the ocean, and a lot of speculation. But I remember learning as a kid, those were just the statistics that not that many salmon survive life in the ocean.
Yeah.
But they say it's gotten worse, but a lot of it's because the habitat has been changed pretty dramatically. Everywhere there's a city, you can't have salmon spawning. So I don't know why. I don't know how they're going to restore salmon in downtown Seattle. That just doesn't make any sense. But they will spend the money to try to do that.
And then perhaps more contentiously, what's the update on the fish passages over the dams?
What we've been told on the board is the challenge is twofold. They need to capture the salmon, put them in trucks, and truck them to the spawning grounds around the dams. That's what's being done in the on the Toutle particularly, but on the Columbia River as well. And that capture and transportation is pretty brutal. Those are just really tough conditions, and finding the appropriate spawning grounds is a challenge because of all the blocks and the degradation of the habitat. It's very expensive per fish value.
Are the ladders along the big dams are
the ladders? Well, what the environmentalists will tell you is the numbers would indicate the ladders aren't effective because we're not getting enough of a return. So they do use the ladders. They keep track of the count of the of the salmon that make it through the ladders. That's where the counting stations are, so.
Right, and they're using that number to say that they're not effective, or?
So if I'm hesitating, I have to sort my own political bias from what the facts have been told, but there are ample numbers of fish, salmon, but they're hatchery salmon. And the scientists say that hatchery salmon don't count if you're trying to restore the wild salmon. And so one of the things they look at the windows when they're counting, they have to look at how many wild salmon make it through compared to those that are hatchery. And the hatchery fish all have a top fin that's been clipped. That's how they divide it. So the fact that the salmon are at the falls or at the spillways of the dams, just chomping away at salmon, is an indication that there are salmon making it up there. It's just that they're hatchery salmon. To make matters worse, the governor has said, well, since the orcas are endangered and the orcas feast on Chinook, we've got to increase the number of Chinook that are the prey for the orcas, because orcas need to be saved. And so they're planning to up the hatchery production of Chinook, which is okay if, but they do tend to compete for the same habitat. So the whole thing is filled with a lot of contradictions and new science, new discoveries on what works.
One of the reasons to even talk about this is everything everybody knows, but also it's the sort of the engineering. It's there is no perfect solution. There are only trade-offs. Mm-hmm. And
well, and one of the constrictions on the trade-offs, we don't have full trade-offs because there are Indian treaties that require wild fish be maintained, and the Endangered Species Act kind of confirms that. So we can't. Thank you. The scientists originally in the 30s and 40s said, fish hatcheries and ladders around the dams are going to be sufficient to replace the lost stock. And then the ESA came along and the scientists interpreted that as wild fish are not hatchery fish. You can't restore wild fish with hatchery fish. So makes it a lot more complicated and expensive.
Good morning. This is where I think somewhat the nut factor comes into play. I mean, the salmon, I love salmon, okay? Do I, after I cook it on my barbecue and put it on my plate, do I care so much if it's a hatchery or a natural fish? Not so much. I understand where that's at, and it just reminds me, again, coming from Idaho, where they reintroduced wolves to the environment. There's a reason why they disappeared, okay? So they bring them back to devastate elk herds and cattle herds, and that's a good thing, They keep wanting to expand those. Those wolves in Idaho are now in California. They don't just sit there. Again, I'm not saying to forget the environment, but again, it's a bang for your buck and a cost to enhance natural fish or it's just crazy. And I know that's not your control over that, but wow, somehow we have to get a little more practical in government and a little more common sense. I know that's a hard thing, but I have a son-in-law who built one of those transfer stations up Cougar Way, and it was kind of unique how they do that. It's kind of fun to go and watch how they load the fish up at one end and haul them off and drop them off at another thing. But it's hard to find that environment where they're at, but it was very costly to put that in there. Sometimes things change. Maybe we can't have it the way it was in 1800, is that necessarily bad? I remember I worked at the Oregon Trail Center in Montpelier, Idaho. A lot of Oregon Trail stories. One of the stories that someone wrote in their diary is when they came to Oregon and the Columbia River, they walked across the river on the backs of salmon. You know, now I wasn't there and I don't know how factual that is, but there was a time when it was very much like that. But we can't necessarily go back to that particular time. You know, we need to look at moving ahead and where that money's spent. And we do have an ongoing battle with the population drives where the money goes. And I just appreciate your efforts to get it done here. And I guess proof is in the pudding. And it's like, again, part of your argument can always be, look what we've done with what we've been given. You give us a little more and watch what we can do to enhance it. Anyhow, that's just my rambling.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
In regards to the salmon, he made some points there, but I fish out in CQ and Nia Bay. Hatchery salmon. It's not a problem solver because they're going to have to keep doing it. You have to alleviate the ladder. Either you create a byway and elevate it where the salmon can still get in it and they can do it on their own free will. If you've been to one of those ladders, so many salmon aren't making it up the river because of those dams. But getting rid of the dams isn't the solution either. They got to find a better answer to that. And I don't know about the flavor and the taste, but I know one thing. If you're fishing out in Nia Bay and you get the wild ones, it's the best eating salmon you're ever going to get, especially if they're springers. And yeah, if you think of the volume of water that goes down that river, that them salmon are trying to get up. And then you get to that dam. My question is, how wide is the dimension of the opening for the ladder when you have a body of water that could be 2,000 feet across? How big is the ladder opening? Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I don't care if you're a hatchery fish or you're a wild fish, you're all not going to make it. So it's still another cost because you're going to have to keep doing the hatchery fish. It's costing you money. There's got to be a better solution. Is there anybody on this panel that knows if there's a byway on any dam where they can go beside it? Because you know what also happens, fellas? When they're sitting in front of that dam trying to get in that ladder, who's eating them? Okay, we've heard those stories. I mean, I've been in Seattle a long time. I would rather have the native fish, and probably most of the fishermen that do fish would rather have the native. Who wants farm raised? Most of it's going to be unhealthy or it's DNA affected. Somehow there's a problem. I would assume what he mentioned, and I'm not clear on what he was talking about in reference to, but you know, where they pick up some of these fish and transfer them over. That's probably even better than the ladder because you have the ability to get as many as you probably can. But with the ladder, you go up there and you watch one will come through. You'll sit there for 15 minutes. The fish ain't making it because we put an obstacle in front of them that they can't attain. And that's what we need to look at. So if there is any way, and I've always thought that you think you could build aside the dam, a breezeway of water where they could travel on their own free will. Once they know it's there, I would imagine they'll all follow the leader. I don't know if those are there. They'll follow the leader in the ladder, but when you have a 4 by 4 foot hole and you got 2,000 feet of water across, they ain't going to get up that. And that's why we're in the predicament we're in. Tearing down the dams like they have been doing in Oregon or Klamath area, that isn't it's a fix, but what does it do to us in the sense of power? Where does it land? I think there's a lot of common sense here.
So with regards to the dam, let's not forget, you're absolutely correct. I mean, there has been an impediment. And the earlier assumptions haven't proven to be effective. So we're trying to figure out the alternatives. But it's not just fish recovery that is part of the issue. For those of us in Cowlitz County, we need to make sure the dams remain on the Columbia system for flood protection. And of course, farmers want the irrigation, and there's plenty of jobs navigating products down the river. So there's plenty of reasons why we should be careful about the dams. They do have an impact on the Snake River, and I understand that, but they also protect us from high water, and it's been working since the dams went in.
Well, what I've learned in the past few years, just by reading a little bit or catching something on social media, I know they've been tearing down dams in Oregon. Now, that just can't be the proper solution. They were developed for a purpose to help us. We just didn't take in consideration enough, like you said, the scientists, anybody in their right mind, when you have that volume of water that the fish travel up, and you think you're going to put them through a little porthole, and that's going to work. I don't care if you're a scientist or a third grader, that's not going to happen. And
there was a dam in Washington I think it was the Little Salmon River. So in the gorge, had been there for 100 years. And the company agreed to demolish it because the cost of maintenance and repair wasn't worth the output. They're undersized now. And so they did, they very carefully dismantled it and finally blew out the last little bit. And there was this deluge of silt that accumulated behind the dam that washed down the river.
right.
Because my wife and I travel back to Montana, we travel the gorge quite often. And it's been interesting to watch that big plug of sediment come down. And it's now between Portland and Longview. Hasn't made it past Longview yet, but it will. But the interesting thing was the following year, the salmon had rediscovered that river after 100 years blockage. So the salmon don't have that instinct that goes back to the same place. They're constantly searching out. Like you said, the leaders are constantly finding it out. So the more we can open up stretches of new habitat or blocked habitat, better chance we have of getting those numbers up. That's one of the reasons the Eric Creek is so important up there. It's opening up 10 or 12 miles of previously blocked ideal salmon spawning land.
Right.
Land. And those are the kind of the strategies that we have to continue to infer. We've got to capture and transport around the big dams farther up the river. But,
Yeah.
but there's plenty we can do in the lower reaches.
Yeah, I really don't know, those thoughts came to me years back, and I'm going, why wouldn't they create an opening around the dam? It could be further up, further away from the dam, and take it all the way around the dam. And as long as it's up above the volume of water or to a smaller level, you can still retain the dam in that elevation for water to keep it held. I don't know if that's ever even been, it had to be thought about. Maybe the fish won't go atop the water and seek out, but I don't know. It seems odd that why wouldn't they?
Be a good discussion to have with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
They're always so easy to work with.
And think about this, anybody that's against the dams, it's the most easiest power we could have, and it's created by another resource. Okay.
And it's
So-
renewable.
Yeah, it's cleaner. I don't know if anybody's been inside of a dam, but it's quite an interesting creation. And that's my point. And I know springers are much better tasting out there than a native fish.
Thank you.
Any other comments on consent agenda? Can we get through consent agenda? Culvert pipe has gone a long ways here.
Yes, well, just one other fact is that the Colville Indian Reservation, one of the wealthiest reservations in the country is working diligently and has been working diligently to get fish ladders up and around Chief Joseph Dam and Grand Coulee Dam and all sorts of ways. So anyway, you can do some more research and see other options.
Any other questions on consent agenda?
Just a comment on my part, which is think this discussion we just had made me quite happy. It's the kind of interaction, usefulness that, anyhow,
I don't mind it at all. I was just teasing a little bit.
oh yeah, no problem. I wasn't trying to infer anything out of that. I am sort of apologizing for having asked the question, but at the same time, it's a false apology because it was intentional.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve today's consent agenda as presented by staff.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Looking for last questions or? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Thank you. Two motion items today. Are you taking the first one? Who's doing the discussion on the first one? You are? The first one is resolution adopting revised Board of Commissioners rules and orders of business policy. Staff has been going through some of the policies and trying to clean them up, and I don't think they've probably been looked at in a long time. You can probably talk to that a little better, but so we're just trying to clean some issues up. This won't be the first one you'll see come to us, but this is the one now.
Yeah, the staff and I are in the process of going through the policies. This is one of the first ones that you'll see coming through the meeting. It's the Board of Commissioner Rules and Orders of Business. It has been reviewed by our office, by Commissioner Mortensen, and by the civil attorney. And we have some corrections in it. Most of it is standardizing the language, taking out some specific dates and times that was in there and making it a little more broad so we don't have to change the policy each time we change a meeting. Some of the other things that were corrected had to do with public comment, and I don't know if you want to discuss that, Commissioner Mortensen. And let's see. It also had been taking out some of the board member expenses because it was a duplicate from another policy.
Okay. Questions,
Yeah,
comments?
several comments. One comment is when you deal with legal issues, it's really nice to be as succinct as possible. And it eliminates many places of ambiguity. And as we take a look at the county code, it's been added on to over the years, and I don't think it's ever been cleaned up. And you know what that means. And I want to thank our clerk of the board who had the foresight and the energy to go ahead and say, we're going to fix the county code. If nothing else, we'll make it less ambiguous, more succinct. And in playing that part, our legal counsel is important. So I am quite in support of these changes and appreciative of them.
Any other questions, comments?
I just also wanted to add that we have now put them on our website, and so they're available. Previously, it was just one complete Word document. It was about 600 pages that you would have to scroll through. And now they're individually put on the website with dates and a process for it to be reviewed by the manager or the department head. So it will be frequently viewed instead of just when it needs to be done.
I think clerk of the board is also trying to put in a method, which I think is really important, which is each county code has a clock on it, an unofficial clock. It's a backroom clock that says, oh, it's been a year since it's been reviewed. Let's review it. And a difficulty with things in the government when there's turnover of commissioners and so forth, it's really hard to keep track of the rationale behind stuff. And she's putting efforts to try and improve all of that, so we really know what's going on.
Yeah.
I know two of the change areas are the result of legislative action. You may recall that the legislature required us to expand our Board of Health to include non-elected members. Well, there's a lot of language on the rules that we do as the Board of Health back when it was just the three of us. So that's being updated and changed. And the other thing is some clarification for open public meetings. And we have to make sure that our guidelines are consistent with those two legal changes. So that's something that happens all the time. Whenever the legislature's in session, we always have to figure out, well, how did they change our job and make the adjustments. So I appreciate the updating.
It's interesting. You probably recall the legislature wanted to impose rules upon us, but not upon themselves.
Yes.
Gee, does that sound strange and unusual?
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion?
please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve resolution rescinding 03-037 and adopting the revised Board of Commission rules and orders of business policy.
Okay, we have a motion to approve on the floor. Last chance I don't see any hands. Okay, call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Thanks, Kelly. Human Resources.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jessica Warren, Human Resources. Before you is a 3-year collective bargaining agreement from January 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2026 between Cowlitz County and Teamsters Local Union 58, Corrections Clerical and Cooks. This agreement covers 4 employees in Corrections Clerical and Food Service. Some highlights to the agreement are financial changes, including cost of living increases of 5% for 2024, 3.5% for 2025, and a cost of living equivalent to 100% of the CPI West Class BC June to June from 1 to 3.5% in 2026. Additionally, there's increases to the employer contribution to Teamsters health benefits by $50 a month each year, equaling $1,700 a month in 2024, $1,750 in 2025, and $1,800 in 2026. With an addition of 1 floating holiday after 6 months employment and an additional bonus leave accrual after 20 years employed. Along with these financial changes are other language changes, including the ability to use donated leave after 6 consecutive months employed, the employer's ability to approve leave without pay prior to hire, and the employer's ability to place new hires with relevant experience higher than step 1 upon hire.
Jessica, I did have a question regarding the healthcare benefits. You mentioned $50 a month increase for the next 3 years as part of the agreement. So that will ultimately be up to pretty close to what, $1,700, $1,800. Well, our costs are going up for healthcare. Do the employees' contribution to their healthcare go up the same amount, or do they, are their rates even higher? Depending on the, depending on the program, but kind of typically.
Depending on the plan, for Teamsters Insurance, their contributions have remained pretty much the same for the past several years. For some of our other groups, the employees' contribution will go up more than $50 a month for some plans, but sometimes it fluctuates depending on the plan and depending on the choice that the employee makes.
So the increased costs aren't completely borne by us. I mean, we're sharing that.
Correct.
And then does this union have access to the VIBA plan?
No.
Oh, okay. So
This group is exclusively with Teamsters Health
Okay.
Benefits.
then the Teamsters doesn't do the VIBA?
No.
The VIBA is money that we provide to employees who don't take our insurance because they're covered by a spouse's insurance, and that's a savings for all of us, actually, something like that, but not with this group. Okay, thank you.
So, one of the, I'm not sure I'm going to paint the proper picture behind the question, but it is really interesting to note these negotiations end up with the numbers you just described, but we very seldom see the hold up number. So if an extra holiday is thrown in, that's a cost that is borne by the taxpayer. And any other perks that do go in there, do you ever see all that expressed as a percentage increase?
With the addition of the floating holiday, I don't know if that would equal a true percentage.
The way you would do it is prior to the contract, we paid $100. Post the contract, we pay, when you take everything into account, $103. So that would be 3%. But the reason that gets me thinking about this is the general purpose of a union is to prevent abuse. But abuse there are two sides to the coin. And I'm not sure who is being abused sometimes. And one way is let's just lay the numbers out so we can see clearly where the costs are.
So one of the other measures we use to see if costs are out of control is excessive overtime. Because you have to hire overtime to get the job done if people are on vacation, right? Or are there some employees that don't get substitutes or get coverage?
I think that's dependent on, a corrections officer, for example. If they're not there, then overtime would need to cover it. For some office positions, we wouldn't necessarily use overtime to cover those positions.
I'm talking in regards to this because I was prior union and I'm retired union. And do I believe they are good? No. Some of them, yes, maybe the Teamsters. Realize this, guys, Teamsters is probably the most powerful union in the United States. Okay. I belong to the floor covering trade up in Seattle. And all you see is abuse in most of the unions. And they got people squeezed and tied up. I wasn't union the whole time I've been in the trade because I didn't like their tactics. I didn't like them judging other people and saying, scabs, non-union factor, just derogatory statements towards others. Can't say that this is in regards to this, but over my term of my trade, which I got into it in 1985, when I got out of the military, I witnessed a lot in the unions, and I was involved in the union meetings. I was paying $10.37 an hour for my health care. 20,000 something a year. One of my points is the insurance companies are stealing from people today. And somebody needs to legislate some kind of control. And where, back in 1985, when I got in the trade, our healthcare contribution, which is paid in behalf of the employee by the employer, was like $2 an hour. Now it's at $10.37 an hour. And it's probably up because the last time I was working in San Jose, that's what it was. And I'll tell you what we also had to do in regards to you asking if the employee had to pay something, or one of you gentlemen said that. When I was in Sacramento, laying floors down there in Chico Hospital in a birthing wing, this is when I learned that it was 10.37 an hour. If a gentleman that worked in the union did not get 160 hours a month, he had to pay $10.37 an hour to make up the difference. So if you got 80, you're paying $837. And I find that it's criminal. But also, if anybody's going to believe that the unions, and I mean, some people may not like me saying this that are in the union, especially in our town, and they're abusive, and they take a lot from their employees. And I've only learned that from my own trade. There's not as much benefit to it. And the way they, I'll speak of something, guys, that will really kind of blow your mind, and it might be a little bit off topic, but it's still in revolving this. In our floor covering union, years back, right now my pension's underfunded. It's 61%. Okay, guys. Teamsters, I'm sure, is a little bit fatter because they have the population. They have the capacity of people still in it. Well, what hurt our trade is the federal government, is what we heard from the union back in the, I'd say around 2000, when we were having discussions in regards to this. What they did, because you have signatory companies that sign in with the union on all the trades. They'll sign up your shop. If you're an electrical worker, HVAC, it doesn't matter. And you'll sign a contract to follow and abide by the rules and pay in the dues, pay in the hourly rates, pay in whatever you got to pay to the union. Our pensions are going south and they're not in good shape. And it's not just, I mean, the Teamsters don't have a problem, I don't think, with this because they're so huge. But most of the skilled labor, skilled trades in this state and other states have a problem because they've been mismanaged. They're managed by a fiduciary, and we've had to fire them because money just disappeared. My point is now, I don't want to talk off topic because I want to make sense to this, is shouldn't have strayed here. Give me a moment. It's darn it. It's just, the federal law. This is what we heard when we had these problems. There's been a federal law that came out, and the reason why our floor covering trade in Seattle and other places are failing is there's a federal law that says these signatory owners, okay, that sign an agreement with the unions or with the union to participate, say your fiduciary fails and steals your money. And we've heard all kinds of stories over the years at our ages about this happening in the unions. The employers that signed a signatory agreement with the unions have been made responsible by the federal government to pay it again. You won't get any retainability. No signatory shops are going to come in. And I can't say this is in behalf of the Teamsters, guys, okay? But this is what most of the skilled shops are. You are obligated, say you were a great employer and you supported the union, and that union went broke. I've seen companies in Seattle having to owe $2.5 million because of our underfunded pensions, and the federal government has made them responsible. Do you think you would sign an agreement that said, I paid this in already over Robert Johnson for the last 20 years, and you're going to make me pay it again now because of your responsibility? That's what goes on. And those kind of agreements are no good. And I know this is a little off topic on the healthcare, but this is outrageous, the prices. You heard her, $1,750. Mine was 20,000, and I'd work 2,000 hours a year. 20 grand for healthcare. It has to be controlled because the constituents are paying it. The taxpayers are paying that. Now, a lot of people don't even have that benefit of a union. The market share of the unions today are this compared to overall. So should all the constituents cover all these other people's issues? I don't know. That's where I would question that. I know we're talking 4 people, but that's something that people need to realize. And I don't know what you gentlemen think of unions, but maybe what they were founded on were good, but we've seen a lot of abuse over the years. And I'm not saying it in this case whatsoever, but it certainly is there. And that's pretty much what I got to say.
Back closer to the topic is that, again, you being human resources, you represent us, the payers and the constituents in the agreement. So we all know that prices and costs have went up due to inflation and the printing of Biden bucks. So have you projected what the cost increase that we're going to have to pay for next year following this contract would be in the budget as the commissioners have to round out or work their budgets? And secondly, what terms and conditions have you worked on to improve efficiency in private enterprise? We know that prices are going up, but we can't necessarily throw the cost back at the people. We have to look at efficiency, effectiveness, and results to counter those cost increase. So 2 questions. Can you answer those?
I can't speak to improvement to private industry. But as far as the current collective bargaining agreement, I work with the Board of County Commissioners as well as our finance director during the course of negotiations. And as far as this is an estimate, but in 2024, the increase would be a $12,000 increase roughly, 2025, roughly $10,000, and then 2026 would be a range from $4,000 to $10,000.
Okay, so commissioners are aware of that projections for the next years. Okay, was there anything in labor negotiations, discussions about, we have all kinds of new technology coming along. We can't sit back. We have to implement some of these things, whether it's security in the jails or cameras or whatever. So was any of that negotiated?
Not for this group.
Okay, we need to be working on that to make us all more efficient and effective.
So Ron, one of the things that we do on a regular basis is we meet with Jessica, and she talks about how the negotiations are going and gets advice from us on kind of the upper and lower limits. But the interesting thing is we have about 11 unions now, 10? 8. We're down to 8. Good. So we're about halfway through the negotiations. Yeah.
Yes,
So
I
and the big unions have yet to be heard from.
I should have 2, hopefully 3 in the upcoming weeks, and then I'm still negotiating with 2 groups.
So yeah, that continues to be a lot of work. And we also work with department heads and say, okay, money's limited. You've got to come to us with your requests for those technologies and those improvements. And we've been pretty supportive when our department heads have come to us asking for different things to improve productivity. That's what it only makes sense. That's what you've asked us to do too.
So let me say an interesting question is there are 8 unions. And you might ask yourself, are there really 8 distinct problem areas that would cause us to have 8 distinct unions? And I suspect that we have 8 for various historical reasons. We talked about spring cleaning, and I'll leave it at that. The 4-person union is something that is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. It cost us effort to negotiate with each of the unions, and that is, it's a non-negligible cost to do that. Another thing a gentleman prior mentioned, unfunded liabilities. We know that our Social Security is unfunded, and I think the gentleman's comment about the pension plans is they're pretty massively unfunded in some instances. A good friend of mine was in the Glazier Union. He's retired now, and he claims that their liabilities there are well in hand. The common factor between performance is always going to be the people, and it's our responsibility to make sure we have department heads that do all the things another gentleman asked for. And to the best of my knowledge, we're doing relatively decently there. It is true that in the private industry, at some point, you can't raise the prices, and what happens is you go out of business. But of course, they get involved with the lobbyists and do all kinds of things that aren't exactly clean. So I'm not sure what I'd really draw out of there. It used to be, statistically speaking, that's my own opinion, I don't have any numbers on that, an employee really cared about the employer. That is to say, I'm going to get the job done and I'll do the very best I can do. And today it seems that the attitude more or less is I can always find a job somewhere else. And so I don't put in the effort as if survival is important. Doesn't seem to be the level of pride. Back when I was quite a youngster, I could tell when the U.S. trades were involved, because it was workmanship that you would just be jealous, envious of. And I'm not sure where we stand there now, as the unions have become more a political entity than they have been a trade entity. And then a mention about the union participation. The gentleman mentioned numbers dwindling. That is correct. I don't have the numbers in my head. At one time I did. Union participation in private world has gone down by at least half, from about maybe 16% in 1980-ish. You'll have to take that a little bit carefully, down to under 8% in 2010. Meanwhile, the government union participation, government employee unions, that has gone up by more than a factor of 3 in that same amount of time. So they're up about a third and to the north of a third. So there are significant changes, and I appreciate all the comments that I've heard.
One thing real quick, we have roughly a little over 500 employees.
Yeah, about 525 full-time employees.
How many are under union versus not? Any idea?
If I were to give an estimate, I would say probably about 400
are covered by one of the union contracts. Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I listened to these numbers, and it seems kind of like your cost of increase for like 3.5% or whatever. You know, our inflation is going through the roof. It's way more than that. The health issue, health insurance issue, it's a mess. It is. And there's higher forces at work here that are screwing everybody out of having some kind of health insurance. So I think the way you guys are doing is good. I think that our employees should have good coverage. You know, when I was young and I went to work at the mill, I didn't have to pay anything for health insurance. I was in the union, and you had the understanding, you know, that get hurt, go get taken care of. Now you've got deductibles and did you make your last payment? And then if you do get hurt and you're hurt for any period of time, then you're not working. So then you lose your insurance. I've seen this happen to people. And so, you know, I mainly came up here just to say, I think we ought to take care of our employees and try and do the best job we can. Although there's these, you know, monumental forces that are at work that we really can't control. But I do think our employees all should have, you know, good insurance and get, you know, good pay and be ready to get those increases.
I'd like to, this board has, and I'll say, and they can say yay or nay. We have chosen not to put on the backs of employees and making whole of anything that we're doing. And we haven't done that since I've been on the board. So in some sense, we're often discussing a dollar here, a dollar there. The point is, though, the system, as one can conclude from what I'm saying, it's just a rotten system. We don't have proper feedback mechanisms. We don't have a rotten system.
I totally agree with the gentleman that just came up here. I'm not against taking care of people because everybody should be under a good healthcare program. But what you mentioned about abuse in the unions also, and there's abuse everywhere. It's not just unions. I'll give you, for example, when I was a young man here in Seattle, and I worked constantly because I knew my trade well. And so I didn't have a problem accruing hours. When we first got in the trade, you could have 6 months reserve because say your contribution for healthcare was $3 and you were paying, but there was a cap. I think it was back when in 85, 86, the cap was like 17, so many hours. And you ended up with about 50% of your hours that you paid in that would go to reserve. Well, they would only allow you to have 6 months reserve for the year. And I go, and the reason why this came up, I was at a union meeting, and I would imagine some of this is correct because I've talked to the concrete masons and we all talked about our reserve because we all want to be insured. If you're out of work a little bit, you have a 6 month. The concrete masons had a 12-month. Well, there was a young man, probably my age at the time. His name was Tony, and he worked at Queen City Floors, and he had a family. And he didn't get enough hours, and he couldn't afford to, and we didn't have the option to pay the extra money at that time, $10 or whatever it would have been, to have the insurance. So he was uninsured. I said, well, I worked 2,300 hours this year. Why can't I give him some of my money? And they looked at me, they go, Mr. Johnson, that's your money. I go, it is. So you took $1,700 or a certain amount of hours, and it was a certain amount of money that you could only go to. I said, well, I have twice that amount that got paid in. They said, well, that goes into the general fund. This is my point in regards to his abuse. And this young lady here, she may not know, because if you don't read the documents and the contractual signatory agreements between the bargaining folks, and we're all at the age where we might know some of this, especially if you've dealt with unions. There's a lot of literature in there that puts that in force. Well, you know where that money goes. to lobbying and politicizing. And I told him, I said, well, that's a second pension for me. If you can't give it to him, and they go, we can't give it to him because it's yours, but you still can't have it. That's where that stuff falls in. And a lot of the people on the private sector don't understand that. They might think they do, but they don't know unless they read that agreement. You know, we get our pension reports every January on the underfunded liabilities. Half the guys don't read them. I told them when I got in the trade, you better read about that pension program because there's also, they all felt that it was guaranteed for life. No problem. Well, I don't know if the folks back here understand what a pension guarantee deal is in regards to when I retired, when I turned 55. I go, I still today don't think our pension will be there in 10 years because nobody will join the union in regards to the signatory that I talked about earlier, because the federal law is saying you are going to pay, even if your funds go broke, the employer would have to pay to make it up again. That isn't working. That's why they're hurt worse. My point is here again now, I wish I wouldn't have jumped off topic and I'm sorry, but they're taking that money. These folks won't know that. They just won't know it unless they've learned and been involved. And should they be burdened? Because most of the people aren't union in this country, you know, and quite a few of them do quite well. And do I believe in unions? Yes. If they were managed right too, and people were held accountable and it wasn't covered up. That's certainly a good thing, but we have the same problem. Wherever there's money, there's corruption. And it's just the way it is. Concerning this, that's your deal. But most of the regular workers don't even have the health care that these folks have. Not even close, but yet they get burdened by it. So if anything, we should be legislating to take care of the people that are actually paying the meals of these others. And that goes for everybody in right here, all of you guys. The folks in the back and the other people that don't make a hell of a lot of money are still being taxed to pay those great insurance qualities that they get, and they don't even have it. I mean, we all know this, and it's a shame that it can't be fixed in legislature. Look at it, and I'll go right to the heart of it. You walk around and there's people that are missing teeth that have worked all their life. They can't even afford to get proper dental care. I certainly am not going to put them down or anything. If you think about it, it's the dollar. It's everything right now, and it's even worse today, but it's been going on for a long time. And those are the things that we really need to look at. Whose coattail are we riding on? And do we really care about the people that are paying the ticket? That's very important. And to go back what I said, I'm telling you the truth here. They told me it was my money, but I can't have it. But it goes over into the general fund and gets used to go to a conference, have a little tea with the boys, and keep doing the same thing over and over. And that's the bottom line.
Okay. Good conversation. Any other comments on this particular item? I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the agreement with the Teamsters Union that has been negotiated by staff.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Seeing no hands. Anybody coming? I'll call for a vote. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Also vote aye. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, commissioners.
Real quick on upcoming stuff. January 24th, we have rural public facilities. I'm not in on, and these are Wednesday meetings. January 31st, we have Public Facilities District update. That's the group over at, the Expo Center is part of the Public Facilities District where the hotel is going in, and they have just completed a master plan and what they think that whole area might look like and things, improvements that could be made. It should be an interesting meeting if you're inclined to sit in on that one. And wow, clear down in March, we have Gifford Pinchot coming in, but in the January ones, the 24th and the 31st on Wednesday, we have a couple entities coming in that you might be interested in. With that, unless there's any quick comments from the board, I see none. We'll open to public comment. Yeah.
I think I wanted to say that I forgot that, but I want to make a point at it. And I don't have any problem giving people money to have insurance. But I forgot what I was going to say earlier and I just remembered it. The Pension Guarantee Corporation, which is back east, I called them when I retired. And I said, hey guys, what's the deal if we go broke in our union? You know what they told me? They said, we don't have any money. We gave it to all the city, state, and federal pension plans. We're broke ourselves. That's exactly what they said. Now, I don't know their status today, guys, but that's exactly what they said. And that's what I meant to say earlier. That's the problem we have. And all the money went to bail out what we just reinforced. And it's not their fault, but this is what we got going on in this country. And the private sector or the small skilled labor, if it's IBEW that goes broke, you know what they're going to get? 12 cents on the dollar. See you later. Have a good day. They won't get no help especially if there's no money in that pension guarantee program. And that's what the lady told me. And you can call back there and get your own information on it. I don't know where they're sitting today, but hopefully they allocated some more money and it goes to the private sector trades in the future for their own survivability.
Yeah. I've actually seen that with a couple I know where their pension failed and went back to the guarantee and they got like 50 cents on the dollar.
Looking at the big picture, it was announced in the last few days that we supposedly added 260,000 jobs in the country during the month of December. And for 10 months out of last year, those numbers are revised down every beyond that. So the numbers are whatever they count for, but 52,000 of those jobs were government jobs. The big union, that the key point is that tells us we added 52,000 more people that we have to pay for in the government for all of us working. And even at 260,000, that says that that's taking, if that number was good, 5 workers to pay for a new employee in the government. And if that number goes way down, so we're way out of whack. And I appreciate you guys holding your budget and watching it because our federal government is really taking us down the drain.
Just had a comment on the hatchery salmon issue. Several years ago, I lived in Lincoln County, Oregon, and had the occasion to volunteer at a fish hatchery up in the hills east of Depot Bay, Oregon, and where we were clipping the fins on the tiny salmon that are about an inch and a half to 2 inches long before they released them into the river to go out to the ocean. And yeah, they put them in a bucket and then mix some chemical in to kind of anesthetize the little fish so that you could hold them, and you pick up each fish individually and then clip the fin with a pair of scissors, and then they'd release them out into the ocean. But I can't for the life of me understand how a salmon that like the ones that we clipped and that they let out to the ocean and they spend their time in the ocean and come back to spawn, how they're going to taste any different than the ones that were naturally spawned. But Just a thought.
Goodness. First, I want to say I believe in unions. However, if you look at the history of unions, one of the difficult things for them, and as was earlier suggested, that we need to get the legislature involved and make legislative changes. As unions came into being, trying to get safer work conditions and reasonable work hours, Monday through Friday, a 40-hour work week, overtime pay after 40 hours, those things that were negotiated by unions, which were very well intended and very well deserved. When the government took over those things, unions lost their direction over time as to what they were after and what they could do, because now all of a sudden state and federal government was involved and making rules and regulations. If you look at the history of the Wobblies that died and the people who fought for those basic things, they were all good things to make things better for the working man. Today, as was earlier stated, the corruption and the things that are destroying unions, the guaranteed pension funds and those things, that it gives an out. And who gets held responsible when those funds go dry because they were mismanaged by the unions involved? I haven't seen any blowback on those people anywhere. The other thing about getting the legislature involved, typically that's where a lot of our problems fall into, is because they don't hold people accountable. And those very programs end up shortchanging the people who work their life savings into trying to have a decent retirement, and it's suddenly it's gone, or they get 50 cents on the dollar or 12 cents on the dollar. Anyway, I don't think the legislature is always the right cure. Well, the other things, when roughly I understood we've got like 400 union employees, when you grant an extra floating holiday for 400 people, that's the equivalent of one person off for a year. Somewhere there's the added cost of covering those people when they're gone.
Well, that was part of this contract for 4 people. I don't know what contracts are for the others.
Okay. So,
However,
Probably fairly similar.
you're right, and we play the game, well, you did it for him, so you've got to do it for me, kind of thing. And that's an escalator to.
yeah, it's a trickle down expansion. It'll get there. The other thing is on the dams on the rivers, well, that was hard for me to sit through that, but they were built for flood control. Irrigation became a secondary benefit, and power was just a byproduct. And it's been a great thing. I don't understand the concept of a bypass versus the fish ladders. Not that the fish ladders are a perfect answer by any means, especially when you can allow sea lions to park their butt in there and get so fat they can't get out of that dam, can't get out of the fish ladder. I actually participated in, at that time, 40 years ago, while I was a PUD commissioner, with the Elwha Dam up in the Olympic Peninsula. I went and toured it, watched all the improvements and everything that were put into that. That dam was originally built to service a paper mill, and it was its sole source of power. And ultimately, the dam got removed, and the sediment problem was one of the big issues. I watched the Quinault Indian tribe do their hearings when they got that river back control of it. And from their own tribe, the people who testified repeatedly to say, do not plant hatchery fish in that river. Let the native fish come back into the river naturally. Those will be the strongest fish, the best fish. Let nature restock the river. And even though their own Indian experts that were there participating in those hearings begged and pleaded with them, they went with the hatchery fish, which just stunned me. One of the things that now has come out of salmon species when they return to the rivers, there's a small percentage, I can't remember exactly, it's somewhere around 4 or 6% of the fish do not come back to the same river that they were spawned in. They're travelers. They go looking for new places to lay their eggs, new places to spawn. So they gradually will find those new streams that are developed or opened up. So I believe in the hatcheries to a point, but I also believe in the wild fish that need to be taken care of. And on that note, I want to tell you, years ago, my father-in-law from Montana came out here, and I took him out fishing, and it was a period of time where you could not keep native fish. So you had to release the native fish, and you could keep the hatchery fish. And sure as heck, his pole went down and reeled up the fish, got it up beside the boat, and I got it in the net and where I could get a good look at it. And I went, oh, gee, it's a wild fish. We have to turn this one loose. And he said, my God, you guys got tame ones out here? And I had to explain to him the difference between a wild fish and a hatchery fish. And anyway, I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you.
Have a comment on the bypass. When you have a dam, you've artificially created a wall and a significant drop. To make up that drop in this span of time means you got a huge slope. If you have a bypass, you can choose the slope you would like. And it's just an engineering problem. And I'm pretty sure that there are many sophisticated possibilities there. That we don't pursue it is a different question.
Yeah.
I've just got to say this. Be careful again with unions, I guess, because you look at the teachers union as an example. There's an entity that has such great strength because of its numbers and because we care about kids, and heaven forbid we have teachers walking out and not educating our students. So we give them what they're asking for. And who gets to pay for that? It's not like the state governments have money rolling in free, that we can just all of a sudden compensate for that increase that's going on. And that's ridiculous. There's a point in time where somebody's got to say, whoa, when we have a county that 400 of the employees of the 500 are union, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think always part of the negotiation ought to be a comparison between union and not. And, are we getting, again, the benefit of that union helping or supporting that individual? Then I'd also say with respect to pensions, I think it's sad that we have the corruption there that has caused too many of them to look like they're going to go under. I have, from my career, I have both a defined benefit that I got for a place that I worked at for 12 and a half years. I have that coming in every month. It's not a big amount. But then I've worked in the private sector that whole time, not through a union. But I was given an opportunity for a 401k, and more that's where things are going. Here's the risk as a country in a 401k. I also was a financial advisor with American Express for a while, and there's very few people who take full advantage of the 401k, where you have employers usually willing to match money. That's 100% return on your money. I would sit down with employees. I said, do you realize there isn't anything better than that out there? Oh, I don't know. And I said, I just gave you a raise. I said, if you would take that raise and put it in there, you will double your money, and it's your money to invest and take care of. But there's very few people who are building that pension, if you will, or the equivalent of pension when they get to retirement. I don't know what they think. I don't know where they think the money's going to come from. You know, but I think we're heading down a road that's not going to be so good. And the overall benefit of unions is going to become just really a confrontation between employers and unions, and to see how many union folks you can get together to hold people over a barrel, which then hurts all of us, because somebody's got to pay. Somebody's got to pay for what the union people are asking for. I don't think what was proposed here today sounds out of line necessarily, but I wasn't involved in the negotiations to see what was alternatives. It didn't go along with this union. What would happen to those positions? Could we hire those, or would all the other unions support them in a strike or something like that? You know, there would be a problem. And I'm not saying you didn't want to go down a road like that, but there's a point in time when they're going to demand too much. And again, you guys your opportunity, I guess, or what you have, if it gets more expensive, we've got to look at raising taxes in order to pay for those. And then there aren't many people who are going to be happy with you or with anyone in that scenario. But I don't know an easy solution to that. I think that's our ongoing challenge each time. And I appreciate you being so open with it. And she has done a very effective job, and knowing her numbers today was awesome. I thought so.
Well, I agree with a number of the things that you said, but I don't think that we ever get to the point where the only solution is to raise taxes. I think one of the things that this commission has been pretty consistent about is doing what we can to encourage the growth of industry, trying to figure out ways to attract more businesses here. If you build a bigger pie, the revenues don't have to have higher taxes. We have more economic activity, and that's a good thing. The unemployment statistics have done an incredible turnaround. For years and years and years, Cowlitz County was consistently 2% above the state average. I don't know, the headlines haven't been all that pronounced. When I was growing up here in this community, Cowlitz County was always at the bottom of the list as having the least amount of unemployment, because we had full mill employment, and that was our savior. And of course, that's changed over the last several generations. But the most recent statistics show that we're back down and several percentage points below the state average. It's been a long time, I think, since the closure of the warehouse or the Reynolds mill, that we've been that low in unemployment. But the other interesting statistic was that there were 4,200 non-retired adults not working. And one of the experiences through the pandemic is people don't have to have two incomes coming into the home. And more people are choosing to stay out. And that's interesting. It's a little bit baffling. If they're not applying for unemployment comp, then it doesn't count against us as unemployment, and they're not collecting those benefits. But some interesting trends that are happening. More people staying home, and our unemployment numbers are getting better.
And living in tents and doing some of that.
And the Reynolds mill is just about ready for development. They've got just about everything cleaned up. They've got a little ways to go. But
Commissioner, I appreciate that you do look to growth, and I think that's great. You know, I totally agree with that whole thing. But I think just looking at unemployment, you're totally right. There's a large section of people who aren't seeking after employment, but they're employable age. And 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, those people were still actively looking for work. So the numbers really aren't telling us what's the challenge in a community or in a county when you have this many people, because they're going to want services that we tend to supply.
Well, the excuse or the comment that when I share that information, people say, well, you know, the high cost of healthcare is the trigger. And we probably have more mothers choosing to stay home rather than going to work because the healthcare doesn't work out for them. That may be part of it. I don't know.
I think you're
In
probably
which
right.
case there may be improvements in society in other ways, you know.
Yeah.
So
I say,
Find out.
not necessarily a bad thing.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We go back like before World War II, when the head of the household was the breadwinner and our earning power was almost dollar for dollar. What we earned is really the value of that.
Yeah.
When we started having a second income, then manufacturers said, gee whiz, why should I charge this for this refrigerator? These people could afford this. So let's raise the price on that, which meant, well, let's do that over here and over here.
Change the word refrigerator to housing.
Okay.
Yeah. Because housing costs haven't
And
come
we
down.
shot ourselves in the foot because we didn't really, as a household, improve our ability to take care of ourselves. Our earning power became less even with that additional income. So I think you're right. I think there is some transition going in where families are stopping for a second and say, wait a second, by the time I want to pay childcare and some of those things that go along with that, what am I really making by having the parent out of the home? Which would be a good thing if we really went back to, I think it was Commissioner Mortensen that talked about we need to reestablish the value of families and that there be a man and a woman, a husband and a wife taking care of kids, and a lot of our challenges in communities would improve. And what a great thing that would be if we could do that.
Okay.
Didn't think I wanted to come up here this much. In regards to the teachers, we know that's a severe problem in this country. Our education is horrible compared to any other nation. We got the worst. And they got the clout that is totally ravaging the taxpayers. And then the other comment the gentleman made there in regards to he's got a defined benefit pension. I don't know if everybody knows what that means, but probably because we're all pretty old. The minute you croak, that pension stops. No heirs get it. Nobody gets it. Now, unless you've signed a spousal agreement prior to your retirement, 60-40, whatever they might have in the terms of that agreement. There's a lot of stipulations in what I think about this young man over here with a gun on his side. If he's got a union that represents him, most of the folks don't read the pension plan. I got my little pension book and I read it and I go, oh boy. And that's kind of what most young people don't do that. I would recommend anybody that's involved in a pension plan, read everything so you understand what you really do have in your hand. A lot of the younger people don't do that. They're just happy to have a job. They might have been making $8 an hour before they were making 14 and they're just blessed, but they still don't understand that's not enough to survive. What happened in mine, we could do 25 years, whatever happens first, 55 or 25 years. So if you got in the program at 18, you could retire when you're 43. I got buddies that are pulling 5,000 a month. I got some that are pulling 10,200. That got raised because of the underfunded liability. So some of these people that were about ready to retire, that cost them $600,000-700,000 because they got skipped 10 years. That's the thing. So, I mean, and it's not primarily the unions mismanaging that money. It's their fiduciaries who they hire for 17 million a year. You know, my pension plan is only worth 400 million and you're paying somebody 17 million to manage it. You might want to take another look. That's what goes on. And when your business agent is sitting in front of you crying at the union meeting, saying, I'm sorry, that doesn't fix the financial burden you just got. And that's what's going on. And it really needs to be managed throughout the country.
Great conversation today. Appreciate it. Anything else? I don't want to pick on the former senator, but I see you're in here. You just visiting today? Okay. Okay, but nothing else. Thanks for participation. We always appreciate it. It's good to see you. Haven't been a while. And we will adjourn.